The moment my father tapped his wine glass, I knew something was wrong. The sound cut through the chatter at our family dinner like a knife. Everyone fell silent. Dad stood at the head of the table, his face wearing that particular smile he reserved for announcements. My stepmother, Victoria, sat beside him with her hands folded, looking satisfied in a way that made my stomach turn. "I have an important announcement," Dad said, his voice carrying across the private dining room he'd reserved at the Gilded Rose. My half-siblings, Marcus and Clarissa, exchanged quick glances. They already knew. Of course they knew. "As you all know, I've been reviewing my estate plans," he continued. "I've decided that Naomi has chosen a different path in life. A path that doesn't align with this family's values." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. Different path? I'd moved across the country for graduate school, but that was hardly abandonment. "Therefore," Dad said, looking directly at me now, "I'm removing Naomi from the will entirely. The estate will be divided among those who've remained loyal to this family." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Around me, relatives shifted uncomfortably. Some avoided my eyes. Others watched with barely concealed curiosity. Victoria's lips curved into the smallest smile. Marcus cleared his throat and reached for his water glass. Clarissa studied her manicured nails. Nobody spoke. Nobody defended me. The silence pressed against my chest like a weight. "Furthermore," Dad added, his tone casual, almost bored, "there's very little of value left anyway. Most assets have already been redistributed. So really, Naomi, you're not missing much." The lie was so smooth, so practiced that I almost believed it myself. Almost. But I'd seen the property holdings. I'd heard him bragging to business partners about his portfolio just last Christmas. My father was many things, but poor wasn't one of them. Heat crawled up my neck. My hands trembled. I wanted to scream, to flip the table, to demand answers. Instead, I sat frozen, feeling dozens of eyes on me, waiting for me to break down. Waiting for tears, for begging. For the humiliation to be complete. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "I see," I said quietly, setting down my fork with deliberate care. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Thank you for letting me know." Dad's eyebrows lifted slightly. He'd expected more. They all had. I excused myself before dessert arrived, walking out of that restaurant with my head high and my heart shattered. The cool night air hit my face as the door closed behind me, muffling the resumed conversation inside. They were probably already celebrating, already dividing up what they thought was theirs. My hand shook as I unlocked my car. I sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes, unable to start the engine, replaying Dad's words over and over. Disinherited. Different path. Nothing of value left. Each phrase was a carefully aimed dart designed to wound. The drive home passed in a blur. I lived in a small apartment near the university where I was finishing my doctorate in forensic accounting. Ironic, really. I spent my days tracking financial fraud and irregularities for my research, and I'd never thought to look at my own family's books. That night I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of rejection pressing down on me. My mother had died when I was 12. Dad remarried within 2 years. Victoria brought Marcus and Clarissa into our home, and slowly, methodically, I became the outsider in my own family. By sunrise, shock had crystallized into something harder. Something sharper. I made coffee and opened my laptop, pulling up every document I'd ever saved related to my father's estate. I'd been named in his will since Mom died. She'd made him promise. I found a folder from 5 years ago containing estate inventory documents. Dad had asked me to review them once back when he still pretended to value my input. I'd glanced through them, noted some properties and accounts, then filed them away. Now I read every line with the precision I'd learned in my graduate program. Industrial properties in the warehouse district. Residential holdings in 3 states. Investment accounts. Trusts. The portfolio was extensive, worth millions, not the nothing of value Dad claimed. My pulse quickened. According to these records, several assets were still listed under my name as beneficiary. Some transfers looked incomplete. Others had dates that didn't align with what I knew of family history. Either Dad was incredibly sloppy, or he'd assumed I'd never look closely enough to notice. I spent the entire weekend cross-referencing documents, building spreadsheets, tracking discrepancies. By Monday morning, I had a list of 12 assets that should legally still be mine. I requested a meeting with Dad under the pretense of wanting to understand his decision. He agreed, probably expecting me to beg for reconsideration. We met at his office downtown, a sleek building that screamed old money and new arrogance. "Naomi," he greeted me with a handshake that felt like touching ice. "I'm glad you're being mature about this." I smiled politely. "I just want clarity. You mentioned the estate has little value left. Can you walk me through what happened to the properties Mom left me?" His expression flickered just for a second. "Those were redistributed years ago. Family decisions. You were too young to be involved." "I'm not too young now," I said softly. "Which properties specifically?" "The warehouse on Porter Street. The rental units in Maple Heights." Dad's jaw tightened. "Those are complicated holdings. You wouldn't understand the nuances." "Try me," I said, maintaining eye contact. "I'm getting my doctorate in forensic accounting. I think I can handle nuances." The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Dad leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was a stranger. "What exactly are you implying, Naomi?" "Nothing," I said smoothly. "I'm just trying to understand what happened to assets that were supposed to be mine. Foreclosure." Dad stood abruptly. "I don't have time for this. The decisions are made. If you want to contest them, hire a lawyer." I left his office with my suspicions confirmed. His defensiveness, his refusal to provide details, his sudden anger, all red flags. People who have nothing to hide don't react that way to simple questions. I needed help, but I couldn't afford to trust just anyone. Then I remembered Theodore Ashford, the family's longtime estate attorney. He'd known me since I was a child, had worked with my mother before she died. If anyone would tell me the truth, it would be him. I called his office that afternoon. His secretary tried to redirect me, but I insisted it was personal. Theodore called me back within the hour. "Naomi Pierce," he said warmly. "I heard about the dinner announcement. I'm sorry. Mr. Ashford, I need your help. Something doesn't add up about the estate distribution." There was a long pause. "Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? Early. Before my regular appointments." That pause told me everything. He suspected something too. Theodore's office smelled like leather and old books. He was in his 70s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of face that had seen too many family secrets to be shocked by anything. He slid a folder across his desk. "I've been waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Your father made some unusual transfers 3 years ago. I advised against them, but I'm not his only attorney anymore." I opened the folder. Inside were property deeds, transfer documents, and trust amendments. My heart started racing as I scanned the papers. "This warehouse property," Theodore pointed to a document. "It was transferred to Marcus 2 years ago, but the deed was never properly filed. Technically, according to county records, you're still the legal owner." My breath caught. How is that possible? Carelessness. Arrogance. Your father assumed a handshake and an internal document were enough. They're not. Theodore pulled out another file. This isn't the only one. There are at least 4 properties where the transfers are incomplete or improperly executed. I stared at the papers, my mind racing. Why didn't you say something? I did. Your father ignored me. Then he hired a younger attorney who tells him what he wants to hear. I spent the next week documenting everything Theodore gave me. Late nights at the library, cross-referencing public records with the estate documents, building an airtight case. Each discovery felt like finding gold. One evening, I overheard Marcus and Clarissa at a coffee shop near campus. I wasn't spying, they were just loud and careless, sitting 2 tables away. Can you believe she just accepted it? Clarissa laughed. I thought she'd at least cry or something. Dad knew what he was doing, Marcus replied. Naomi was always the weak one. Too soft. She'll probably send a sad email and then disappear back to her apartment. Good riddance, Clarissa said. More for us. I recorded their conversation on my phone, keeping my head down behind my laptop. Their arrogance was breathtaking. They truly believed I was defeated, that I'd simply fade away while they divided assets that weren't legally theirs. I smiled into my coffee cup. Let them think I was weak. Let them think I was gone. Underestimation was a weapon, and I was learning to wield it perfectly. Theodore introduced me to the estate trustee, a woman named Patricia Holbrook who managed the family trust my mother had established before she died. Patricia was professional, meticulous, and visibly uncomfortable when I started asking detailed questions. "I've been concerned about some of these transfers myself," she admitted during our meeting. "Several were executed hastily, without proper documentation. I raised concerns with your father, but he assured me everything was being handled by his legal team." "But it wasn't handled properly," I said, showing her the evidence Theodore and I had compiled. Patricia's expression darkened as she reviewed the documents. "No, definitely wasn't. Some of these transfers may actually be voidable due to procedural failures." My pulse quickened. "What does that mean?" "It means," Patricia said carefully, "that assets your father claims he redistributed might still legally belong to you. The trust your mother created had very specific requirements for any transfers involving your inheritance. Those requirements weren't met." I felt the first real surge of hope. This wasn't just about mistakes. This was about my mother's final wishes being ignored. Word traveled faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, whispers started circulating among extended family members. Naomi was asking questions. Naomi was looking into the estate. Naomi wasn't as defeated as everyone thought. Victoria called me on a Wednesday evening, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "You need to stop this nonsense immediately. You're embarrassing yourself and this family." "I'm just trying to understand what happened to assets that were left to me," I said calmly. "Your father made his decision. Accept it gracefully." "Was it graceful when he announced my disinheritance at a public dinner?" I asked. "Or is grace only required from the people you're trying to erase?" Victoria's silence was sharp enough to cut. "You're making a mistake, Naomi. Walk away now or you'll regret it." "Is that a threat?" "It's advice. From someone who actually cares about this family's reputation." I almost laughed. "If you cared about reputation, you wouldn't have let Dad humiliate me in front of 40 people. But thank you for the advice. I'll consider it." I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From anger. From the satisfaction of finally pushing back. I gained access to bank records through Patricia's cooperation. The trust gave me legal standing to review accounts connected to my mother's original estate. What I found made my blood run cold. There was an account in my name that held nearly $200,000. Funds from my mother's life insurance policy that were supposed to be transferred to me when I turned 25. I was 28 now. The money had just sat there untouched, while Dad told everyone the estate had no value. I documented everything with screenshots and printed statements. Every transaction. Every balance. Every piece of evidence that Dad had lied about the estate being worthless. Theodore reviewed my findings and whistled low. "Your father is going to have a very bad day when this comes out. This isn't just family drama anymore. This is potential fraud." "What should I do?" I asked. "Quietly reclaim what's yours. Don't announce anything yet. Let them stay comfortable in their assumptions. The element of surprise is worth more than immediate confrontation." I followed his advice. Working with Patricia, I began the process of legally reclaiming the bank account and the improperly transferred properties. Everything was done through proper channels with documentation with legal precision. The next family gathering was my cousin Amanda's engagement party. I almost didn't go, but Theodore convinced me it was important to maintain appearances. "Let them think you're wounded but polite. It'll make the eventual revelation even more devastating." I wore a simple blue dress and arrived fashionably late. The party was at my father's house, the same sprawling estate where I'd grown up. Walking through those doors felt surreal now, like visiting a museum of my own past. Dad greeted me with surprise. "Naomi, I didn't expect you to come." "Why wouldn't I?" I said pleasantly. "Amanda's my cousin. I wouldn't miss this." Victoria watched me from across the room, her eyes narrow with suspicion. Marcus and Clarissa whispered to each other near the bar. I ignored them all, congratulating Amanda and making small talk with relatives who'd witnessed my public humiliation. Under my smile, I was armed with information none of them knew I had. Assets reclaimed. Accounts secured. Legal oversights documented. I moved through the party like someone who belonged there because I did. More than any of them realized. The tension was electric, but I stayed composed. Marcus cornered me near the garden patio. "You need to stop causing problems," he said, his voice low but aggressive. "I haven't caused any problems," I replied calmly. "You're questioning the estate. Making accusations. It's pathetic." I met his eyes directly. "I'm asking legitimate questions about assets that were left to me. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should ask yourself why." His face flushed. "Dad made his choice. You're not part of this family anymore." "Actually," I said softly, "legally, I'm more part of this estate than you realize. But you'll find that out soon enough." I walked away before he could respond, my heart pounding but my expression serene. The panic in his eyes had been delicious. He didn't know what I knew, but instinct told him trouble was coming. Clarissa was next, approaching me with false sweetness. "Naomi, I hope there are no hard feelings about the inheritance. Dad did what he thought was best." "Of course," I said. "I'm sure he did." Her smile faltered slightly. She'd expected anger or tears. My calm acceptance unsettled her more than any outburst would have. The hidden bank account was just the beginning. With Patricia's help, I uncovered a brokerage account that had been opened in my name, using inheritance funds. It contained stocks and bonds worth over $300,000. Dad had set it up years ago, then apparently forgotten it existed. Or more likely, he'd planned to transfer it to Marcus or Clarissa eventually, and simply hadn't gotten around to it. Either way, legally it was mine. The account had my social security number, my name, everything. I felt a rush of quiet triumph as I signed the paperwork to take control of the account. Each asset I reclaimed felt like a small victory. A piece of my mother's legacy that Dad had tried to steal. Theodore warned me to expect pushback soon. "Your father's accountant is going to notice these changes. Properties being re-registered. Accounts being accessed. He'll realize something's happening." "Let him notice," I said. "Everything I'm doing is completely legal. I'm not stealing anything. I'm reclaiming what was always mine." Theodore smiled. "You've learned fast. Your mother would be proud of how you're handling this." The mention of Mom made my throat tight. This was for her as much as for me. I reclaimed my first property on a Tuesday morning. The warehouse on Porter Street that Marcus thought he owned. The deed transfer was incomplete, never filed properly with the county. With Theodore's help and the proper documentation, I re-registered it in my name. Marcus would eventually receive a notification that he was no longer the owner of record. I couldn't wait to see his face when that letter arrived. I celebrated alone in my apartment that night, ordering takeout and reviewing the growing list of assets I'd successfully reclaimed. Legally, quietly, methodically dismantling their perfect plan. Family dinners became a strange theater after that. I continued attending, playing the role of the politely defeated daughter. But inside I was counting victories, tracking their growing unease. Victoria watched me with increasing suspicion at every gathering. Dad became shorter in conversation, distracted. Marcus and Clarissa whispered more urgently when they thought I wasn't listening. They knew something was wrong. They could feel the ground shifting beneath them. But they didn't know the extent of it yet. They didn't know how thoroughly their arrogance had destroyed their own plan. Victoria made her first real mistake during a phone call with her sister. I wasn't supposed to overhear it, but she'd called while I was visiting Dad's office to pick up some old photo albums he'd agreed to give me. "I told him to check all the paperwork years ago," Victoria said, her voice sharp with irritation. "But he was so confident Naomi would never look into anything. She was always so passive, so eager to please. How were we supposed to know she'd grow a spine?" I recorded the conversation from the hallway, my phone pressed against my chest to muffle any sound. Every word was evidence of their conscious decision to mishandle the estate, their assumption that I'd be too weak to fight back. "The girl's asking questions now," Victoria continued, poking around in trust documents. "Theodore's helping her, the old fool. We should have replaced him years ago." "Can she actually do anything?" her sister asked. "I don't know. That's what worries me. Some of those transfers weren't filed properly. If she finds out..." Victoria's voice trailed off. "We need to shut this down before it becomes a real problem." I backed away silently. They knew. They knew the transfers were flawed. This wasn't just negligence. This was deliberate. I requested another meeting with Dad, this time with Theodore present as my legal representative. Dad agreed reluctantly, probably thinking he could still intimidate me into backing down. We met at Theodore's office. Dad arrived with his new attorney, a slick-looking man in his 40s who'd clearly been briefed to play hardball. "Naomi," Dad began, "I understand you have some concerns about the estate distribution." "I have questions," I corrected. "Specifically about why several asset transfers were never properly completed. The warehouse on Porter Street, for example. Or the investment accounts that are still in my name." Dad's attorney jumped in. "Any oversights can be corrected through proper legal channels." "They already have been," Theodore said smoothly. "My client has legally reclaimed assets that were improperly transferred without her knowledge or consent. Everything has been done according to county regulations and trust requirements." The color drained from Dad's face. "What are you talking about?" I slid a folder across the table. "I'm talking about the 4 properties and 3 financial accounts that were supposed to be transferred to Marcus and Clarissa but weren't. I'm talking about assets you claimed didn't exist." Within days, the news spread through the family like wildfire. Naomi Pierce had reclaimed properties. Naomi Pierce had accessed hidden accounts. Naomi Pierce wasn't the helpless victim everyone had assumed. I started receiving calls and texts from relatives who'd barely acknowledged me at the disinheritance dinner. Suddenly everyone wanted to talk, to understand what was happening, to position themselves on the right side of the brewing conflict. I ignored most of them. Only a few family members had reached out to me after Dad's announcement with genuine concern. Those were the only ones who deserved my time now. My Aunt Josephine, Mom's younger sister, called with tears in her voice. "I'm so sorry I didn't speak up at that dinner. I was shocked into silence. But I'm proud of you now. Your mother would be too." "Thank you," I said, meaning it. "That means everything." "What happens next?" she asked. "The truth comes out," I replied. "Completely. Publicly. With documentation." Patricia confirmed that several relatives were now asking questions about the estate management. The quiet unraveling had begun, and I hadn't even made a public statement yet. Their own mistakes were creating the chaos. I uncovered evidence that some transfer documents had been backdated, signatures that didn't match, notary stamps from dates when the notary was provably out of state. The more I dug, the worse it looked for Dad and his new legal team. Theodore brought in a forensic document examiner, who confirmed several irregularities. "These signatures don't match earlier documents," she explained. "The pressure patterns are different. Either these were forged, or they were signed under duress." I felt sick. My own father had potentially committed fraud to cut me out of my inheritance. The betrayal went deeper than I'd imagined. "This is serious," Theodore warned. "If you proceed with exposing this, it could result in criminal investigations. Your father could face significant legal consequences." I stared at the evidence spread across the conference table. Part of me wanted to bury it, to pretend I'd never found it. He was still my father. But the larger part of me, the part that remembered his cold announcement at dinner, the public humiliation, the casual erasure of my existence, that part wanted justice. "I want to proceed," I said. "He made his choice. Now I'm making mine." Patricia received a formal warning letter from Dad's new attorney, demanding she cease cooperation with my investigation. She responded by documenting every instance where proper trust procedures had been violated, creating a comprehensive report that would destroy any claim that the mismanagement was accidental. "Your mother created this trust specifically to protect you," Patricia told me during our meeting. "She knew what kind of man your father could be. She built in safeguards. He violated every single one of them." The trustee's report was damning. It outlined systematic mismanagement, incomplete transfers, and deliberate circumvention of trust requirements. Combined with the document analysis and Victoria's recorded phone conversation, we had an overwhelming case. Theodore sent a formal letter to Dad's attorney, outlining our findings and demanding immediate correction of all improper transfers. We gave them 30 days to comply voluntarily before taking legal action. Dad called me directly for the first time since the disinheritance dinner. "Naomi, we need to talk. This has gotten out of hand. You announced my disinheritance at a public dinner, I said calmly. You told me there was nothing of value left in the estate. You were wrong on both counts. I made mistakes. Can't we work this out privately? You had every opportunity to handle this privately. You chose humiliation instead. Marcus and Clarissa's confidence completely collapsed once they realized the extent of what was happening. The warehouse Marcus thought he owned was back in my name. Investment accounts Clarissa had counted on were legally mine. Properties they'd already planned to sell weren't theirs to sell. I saw Marcus at a local grocery store, purely by accident. He looked haggard, stressed, 10 years older than he'd seemed at the engagement party. He started to approach me, then stopped, apparently thinking better of it. Clarissa sent me a long, rambling email about family loyalty and forgiveness, completely avoiding the actual issues. I deleted it without responding. Their world was crumbling, and unlike my disinheritance, they'd brought it on themselves through arrogance and greed. They'd assumed I'd be too weak to fight, too broken to care, too unsophisticated to understand estate law. They'd been wrong on every count. The 30-day deadline arrived. Dad's attorney requested an extension. Theodore denied it. We filed a formal complaint with the probate court, presenting all evidence of estate mismanagement and requesting full judicial review. I organized a family meeting, insisting all major relatives attend. Dad tried to refuse, but Theodore made it clear that their cooperation now would look better than forced cooperation later under court order. We gathered in a conference room Theodore had reserved. Dad sat at one end of the table, flanked by Victoria and his attorney. Marcus and Clarissa looked terrified. Extended family members filled the remaining seats, curious and tense. I stood at the front of the room with Theodore beside me. My hands were steady. My voice was calm. I'd prepared for this moment for months. I asked you all here because you deserve to know the truth about what happened to my mother's estate. I began. At a family dinner 2 months ago, my father announced I was disinherited. He claimed the estate had little value. Both statements were false. I pulled up a presentation on the screen. Property records, account statements, transfer documents, the backdated signatures, Victoria's recorded conversation, Patricia's trustee report. Everything laid out in chronological order, methodical and irrefutable. Gasps echoed around the room as the evidence accumulated. Dad's face turned crimson. Victoria stared at the table. Marcus and Clarissa looked like they wanted to disappear. The room erupted in questions and accusations. Relatives demanded explanations from Dad. Some turned to comfort me. Others argued about what should happen next. Theodore called for order, but the chaos continued for several minutes. Finally, Dad stood. This is a misunderstanding. A series of administrative errors that can be corrected. Administrative errors? I repeated. You announced my disinheritance publicly. You told everyone the estate was worthless. You transferred properties without proper documentation and accessed trust funds in violation of my mother's explicit instructions. Those aren't errors. Those are choices. Patricia stood to present her trustee report. She confirmed every violation, every procedural failure, every instance where the trust requirements had been ignored. Her professional, dispassionate delivery made the accusations even more devastating. Dad's attorney tried to spin the situation, but the evidence was overwhelming. Even relatives who'd supported Dad at the disinheritance dinner were now looking at him with horror and disappointment. The meeting ended with no resolution, but the damage was done. The perfect family image Dad had cultivated was shattered. Everyone now knew the truth about what he'd tried to do, and how spectacularly it had failed. The probate court ruled in my favor within 6 weeks. All improper transfers were voided. Assets were returned to their rightful place within the trust structure my mother had created. Financial accounts were secured under my control. The court also ordered a full audit of the estate management and imposed penalties for the trust violations. Dad was forced to cover the legal costs. His reputation in business circles took a significant hit when word spread about the mismanagement. Several business associates quietly distanced themselves. Marcus and Clarissa lost properties they'd already counted as theirs. Their anger at Dad was almost as intense as their resentment toward me. Family gatherings became awkward, tense affairs that I stopped attending entirely. Victoria filed for divorce within 3 months. Apparently, the financial and reputational damage was more than their marriage could survive. The irony of her abandoning Dad when he became vulnerable wasn't lost on me. I established a foundation using part of my inheritance, dedicated to helping young women navigate estate planning and financial independence. I named it after my mother. Every time someone thanked me for the foundation's help, I thought about that dinner where Dad tried to erase me, and I smiled. 2 years later, I defended my doctoral dissertation successfully. The research I'd done on financial fraud detection had been partially inspired by uncovering the irregularities in my own family's estate. My committee praised the work's thoroughness and real-world application. I bought a house in a quiet neighborhood across town. Dad and I spoke occasionally, stiffly polite conversations that maintained minimal connection. He'd never apologized for the disinheritance announcement, and I'd never expected him to. Marcus reached out once, asking if we could move past all this. I declined. Some betrayals don't deserve forgiveness, especially when the person seeking it hasn't earned it. I found peace in building a life completely separate from the family drama. The inheritance from my mother gave me financial security, but more importantly, fighting for it had given me something Dad's announcement had tried to take away: my sense of self-worth. I'd walked into that dinner as someone who could be publicly dismissed and humiliated. I'd walked out of the legal battle as someone who understood her value and refused to be erased. The estate inventory had indeed told a different story than Dad's announcement. But the real story wasn't about money or properties. It was about a daughter who discovered she was stronger than anyone, including herself, had realized. And that discovery was worth more than any inheritance could ever be.